Hello, folks, and welcome today. Before we jump into the webinar, we wanted to make a brief announcement for Spanish language interpretation. Carlos?
Good morning. As Kevin just indicated, we do have simultaneous interpretation available. To use the feature, please scroll down to the bottom of your Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Then click on the interpretation icon. It looks like a little world, and then select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app on a cell phone, tablet, or other mobile device, first select the ellipsis, the three dots, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, if you do not want to hear the original Spanish flow in the background, please click on mute original audio. This message will now repeat in Spanish. Buenos días, bienvenidos, bienvenidas. Se está ofreciendo servicio de interpretación simultánea.
Welcome everybody, and we're so glad to have you here for the webinar today. My name is Kevin, and I work for the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. The purpose of the webinar today is for us in government to outline and underline the history of redlining and current day environmental injustice, and acknowledge our role at the federal, state, and local levels of perpetuating policies that have led to racial disparities over generations. We're also here to listen to stories from environmental justice leaders in the breakout sessions and on a panel, to learn from their incredible stories and the steps they have taken that lead to real change. I also wanted to thank each and every one of you for attending today amongst your busy schedules. We have people registered from over 25 cities and 4 countries, and so we'll try to share with you something that I think will be really special. I did want to remind everybody to have the webinar program or the reminder email that was sent out this morning nearby for the next part of the webinar after the opening presentation. That has the links you're going to need for joining one of the different 9 breakout sessions to listen to environmental justice leaders from across California. Finally, I did want to just acknowledge up front that there's going to be some difficult language shared today that unearths a dark and painful history of environmental racism and injustice in America. We understand that this can make some people feel uncomfortable, but it's important to face the full history of the United States as context for understanding why it is the way that it is today. And so to get started, I just wanted to share a little bit of background about the birth of the Pollution and Prejudice Project. In 2019, I was working at the California Environmental Protection Agency, and we were conducting an environmental justice initiative in Stockton. The community organizations decided they wanted the focus of the work to be concentrated in the historically redlined neighborhoods of South and East Stockton. These are the places that had the greatest concentrations of industry, heavy-duty diesel traffic, and illegal dumping, amongst many other environmental problems. They shared with us this Stockton redlining map, which was created in 1936. And just looking at it told us a lot about the current day environmental injustices within the built environment. As you can see, these hatch marks represent industrial areas that surrounded the redline communities, which were the only places people of color were allowed to live at this time. If you look carefully, you'll also see that the highways and railroads bisect these neighborhoods and were literally placed to create buffers to prevent racial infiltration into white communities. When we looked at the map, we also found links to historical forms that further illuminated the root cause of the structural inequalities in the city. Areas designated for upper income white communities were labeled hotspots with amenities like trading centers, transportation, grade schools, and recreational areas. These were places that also had racial restrictions to quote unquote protect against infiltration of undesirable racial elements. Finally, when we read the forms from the redline neighborhoods, we learned about areas that didn't have proper sewers that were surrounded by industrial and business areas. They described some places as being infested with subversive racial influences. One form in particular really underlined the dehumanizing way people of color were viewed almost as an equal nuisance as that of pollution. And as you can see that was written here, they concluded this area, after describing the various racial groups, would best be hoped for to be transformed into a business or industrial section. When we share data from the CalENVIROScreen tool, a statewide data set that looks at community level pollution burden and population vulnerability, they asked us if we could transpose those data within the historical redlining maps. What we found was that while many of the historical redline neighborhoods are at the 99th percentile for pollution and health burdens, the areas historically set aside for whites only had much lower percentiles. So as you can see here, For hazardous waste cleanup sites, this census tract is at the 99th percentile, whereas the areas set aside for white-only communities are at the 0th percentile. This pattern also held constant for many other indicators, including diesel particulate matter, as well as prevalence of asthma in children. And so after this initiative concluded, a team of us from CalEPA started working on a project to look at these pollution trends within these 82-year-old maps, and then ask the question, how much racial segregation is correlated with current day pollution and health disparities? Our full story map and the findings, as well as interactive maps, are available on CalEPA's racial equity page. If you haven't had a chance, I really encourage you to take a moment and look at it. And so what we found when we looked at the pollution and health trends across the cities, the red line areas within each of these cities represented by the red dots on their graph had the highest total pollution burden and health negative health outcomes in every city to this day. Furthermore, when we looked at the trend by each of the individual indicators, we found that it held constant for 18 of the 20 indicators in CalEnviroscreen. This is true for air pollution, water pollution. This is true for pesticide exposure, toxic waste. This is true for asthma, low birth weight, and many other variables, including poverty and unemployment. These neighborhoods are still racially segregated to this day, and you will hear about it in the breakout rooms today, whether it's in rural agricultural areas like the Imperial Valley and Kettleman City, whether it's in our cities and communities like Watts and Richmond, or Bayview Hunters Point, or whether it's in tribal areas like Clear Lake with a big valley band of Pomo Indians. And so I just wanted to close this introduction with a question to all of you. What does this history mean to you? Take a moment to read the words that are on the page, written in the 1930s at a time when the foundations of California cities were being constructed. For some of us, it may make you feel uncomfortable. It may make you shocked, and it should make you feel uncomfortable. This is a sickening part of our history. It's been passed on through the generations to us. And some of us who work for federal, state, and local government agencies might have been writing these same words if we were employed by these agencies 80 years ago. For others in the audience, these words are a reminder of the suffering and the pain and fighting against government actions to protect their communities. It represents a struggle over generations that many times they end up losing. And the thing is these weren't just maps. These were millions of actions by millions of people over multiple generations across all levels of government, closely coordinated with private businesses to create conditions where the color of your skin is the strongest indicator of the quality of your neighborhood. And that was their intent. That's literally what racial segregation was trying to accomplish. White supremacy was the state policy goal for desirable land uses and resources being in the hands of white communities. And we can't be under the illusion that it will take anything less than that to change this history in the fight for racial equity. You're not responsible for the actions of your ancestors or what they did, but you are responsible for what you do today, especially those of you in government, especially for those of you with power. And so as you listen today, I hope you'll reflect on this question. What does this history mean for you? And I think we all need to ask ourselves the question, what are we going to do to confront that history? And so with that, I wanted to take the opportunity to introduce you to Joaquin Esquivel, the chair of the California State Water Resources Control Board. And he has served in this role since 2017. Previously, he served as the Assistant Secretary for Federal Water Policy at the California Natural Resources Agency for the Governor's Office in Washington, D.C. And prior to that, he worked for Senator Barbara Boxer's office. So I'm now going to stop sharing my screen. And Joaquin, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And importantly, thank everyone here today for joining us, for taking the time to be part of this discussion and conversation. I am Joaquin Esquivel. I am chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. We're a 5-member board here in the state of California that oversees water rights administration in the state, drinking water regulation. We have a division of financial assistance, and importantly, we have 9 regional water quality control boards that along with the state board, oversee water quality regulation across California. I am very fortunate to have grown up in the Eastern Coachella Valley, where I have been personally know of the incredible disparities that exist within our communities. And I think that what I come here first and foremost is humbly, as someone myself who carry my own biases. I know that I don't speak perfectly around racial challenges or inequalities, but it is incredibly important that we tackle these discussions. And so it's with great humility that I come to this discussion with all of you, and recognizing, as Kevin said, we here aren't personally responsible for the conditions that we find ourselves with in our society. We are inheritors of incredible success and things to celebrate, but also dark parts of our history that continue to perpetuate. You know, having been born in 1982, a millennial here, I very much grew up feeling that we were in a post civil rights era here, where we were fulfilling so much of what was back in the civil rights era, a dream around our communities, to have communities with access to clean water, clean air, and importantly, weren't segregated. You know, the Civil Rights Act, the Clean Water Act, all these seminal pieces of legislation that we, I think, take a bit for granted now, require generational reinvigoration and reinvestment to the cause, because racial inequality and inequities continue to exist. They persist. We've seen them. We continue to know them to be true, and we can see them in the data, in the information. You know, I look at the Eastern Coachella Valley where I grew up, and you have some of the greatest disparities within the nation, but 30 minutes away, you have some of the wealthiest communities in Indian Wells and Palm Springs and Rancho Mirage. And you drive 30 minutes down to Thermal or Oases, places where my father grew up and my grandparents worked in the fields. And the living conditions, the lack of access to clean water, the lack of access to economic viability, even knowing that clean water is the basis of any good economy, is striking. And to have those sort of disparities in our state, let alone in our nation, I think is something that we all, I think, are incredibly surprised by at times. I think you look across the challenges that we all collectively are having to address, like climate change, and racial inequality and inequities are in that same vein. They're systemic. They can seem overwhelming in how to best address. But I think importantly, it begins with a discussion, a very personal discussion amongst us all, in just understanding that our communities face inequality and inequities because of systemic embracing of racist policies in the past. And again, I having grown up here, again, a millennial I grew up thinking that we were past a point in our society where certainly race was so determinative of our futures and of things like access to clean water or clean air. But it is the case. And so I just incredibly appreciative of everyone's time and work to come here, to learn, to understand, and importantly, begin to act, and begin to, not unlike with the challenges we face with climate change, understand and begin to bring solutions to our communities. I'm fortunate that the State Water Resources Control Board has begun to really focus on the inequities in the drinking water space and access to sanitation. We have here in the state of California what's known as the Human Right to Water. And over the past 2 years, with a new program known as the Safe and Affordable Fund, we've begun to close the gap in our communities when it comes to access to clean and safe water, knowing that about 1 million Californians lack access to clean water. And if you map the redlining that's gone on in our communities, which communities have access to clean water and don't, you see, again, a very intentional pattern in our past that has led to the challenges we face now in the present. And it's an understanding of those issues and those challenges that can help ensure that we don't perpetuate them into the future. And I think that is what is so critical and key here, is that we have to bring this discussion to bear, uncomfortable as it is, and as awkward sometimes it is for government agencies like ours to discuss race. But it is so critical that we do so, because absent that discussion, absent doing projects like this redlining mapping project, where we actually try to understand what are the conditions that created these inequities so that we don't perpetuate them, so that we as government agencies and institutions can actually help contribute to a better tomorrow for our communities. And it's not lost on me that 50 years ago, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Endangered Species Act were being passed at a time critically that the Civil Rights Act was part of the discussion. So it's not you can't separate these goals that we have around ensuring access to clean water, ensuring access to clean air, and racial inequities and disparities. They, as we know, were part of, again, part of a common problem. And if we're going to have common solutions, need to be part of the discussion. So thank you all for taking this time, for being here, for engaging with this discussion. I'd like to introduce now Betty Girma, who's with the State Water Resources Control Board and was part of this redlining project. She's an engineer with our Division of Drinking Water and has been working in the Safe and Affordable program, the program that I mentioned, which is helping close the gap in our communities and access to clean water. So I just thank you incredibly, and again, come to this discussion myself humbly and know that we have a lot of work to do collectively. But if we can strike the right discussion, acknowledge that these were intentional policies that were put into place in our communities, and it's going to take intentional action in order to address them. I think that we can together continue to build the communities that we want to see here into the future, because it's about the next 50 years of our work and ensuring that as we adapt to climate change, as we respond to the climate crisis, we also address these other inequities, reconcile these other challenges that we've inherited in this system and in our society, and continue to build a better one. So thank you all today for, again, your incredible attention and work, and look forward to further discussion. Betty, good to see you.
Hi, thanks, Joaquin. If Kevin could pull up the PowerPoint again, that would be great. As he does that, I will give an introduction to the breakout rooms that we have. So now is an opportunity for all of us and all of you to be able to listen to and engage directly with community organizations that are doing on the ground environmental justice work in California. We were very intentional about choosing to have these communities participate with us because we want to have community leaders and community voices heard. Those are the most important voices that we need to be listening to. So we were intentional in having these breakout rooms. Access links for the breakout rooms were emailed in the program, as well as they were in the Eventbrite registration. There are 9 breakout rooms to choose from, and you can see them on the screen. They stretch from, all the way down from Los Angeles up to Northern California, to Richmond, San Francisco, and Clear Lake. So it really encompasses the broad range of the environmental justice issues that exist in California. You'll have 45 minutes in your breakout room once you choose it. And in the room, you will hear a presentation from a community organization, and you'll have the opportunity to engage and dialogue with the organizations. Each breakout room has at least one representative from a community organization that is doing on the ground work in California. And we encourage you to join a breakout room with an organization that you have not previously engaged with in the past. We hope that you use this as an opportunity to learn something new and engage with a new community organization in California that you may have not engaged with in the past, and just use this as an opportunity to hear a new story. So with that, I encourage you to join a breakout room and have a great discussion. And last thing, be back in the main room by 11:05.